Hey everybody, hope that everybody's doing well. And boy, we're already getting towards the end of our second module. It was great, all the discussion with the invention posts. You know, for me personally, it's that much more eye-opening when we have all these different ideas coming from all of you, as opposed to me just lecturing. So thank you again for all the energy and effort in the conversation. It's really what makes these async courses energized. So of course, without further ado, I want to get right to today's video workshop, which is going to focus in on central claims, which are a key aspect of argumentative analysis or critical analysis. It's essentially our thesis statement, except we call it a central claim. And then also talk about introductions. Your central claim is going to be in your introduction. That's not always the case, but in the case of papers of this length, which is relatively short, um, you want your central claim to come as the last few lines, the last sentence or two or three of your introduction. And then also talk a little bit about research pretty quickly, because I am going to ask you to do a little bit of research for this essay. You're not required to do academic research, in part because we just don't really have time to go through that. We're going to do that next module. It's going to be one of the um, skills, if you will, that we'll practice next module. But I do want you to do some online research, non-academic research, and I'll talk about what that should be and what that should look like. So let's get right to it and share my screen as always. Give me 1 second. Okay. So, like I said at the top, we started off, well, we didn't start off, but early on in the module, we started with analysis, right? Talking about subclaims. By the time we got to, we used the double takes discussion board to start to sort of brainstorm different sort of ideas for a focus for a documentary to write about. And then not long after that, we did prying eyes discussion board, and the prying eyes discussion board was dovetailed off of our subclaims video workshop, our last video workshop. And all of that was really focusing in on analysis. As we talked about with a critical analysis, you were doing two things. Or an argumentative analysis makes it even more clear. You're not only analyzing something, you're making an argument about it. So the analysis is how the doc creates its message and how it affects the audience, right? And that's related to your subclaims. But for what we want to do today, we want to think about argument, which is whether or not the documentary's message effectively allows for critical engagement with the issue. So this means our central claim statement will be addressing that question, which comes from our prompt, of course, that we have right above here. So the central claim should be addressing whether or not you feel that the doc allows for critical engagement with the issue, and what is the significance of that. So generally speaking, that's what we're dealing with when it comes to the central claim statement. Now, part of this, getting to this point, or I think life can be a little bit easier to, sorry, just move my video here so it's not in the way. Part of this is asking yourself some initial questions before we start writing a central claim. So, first question you want to ask yourself is, what for you is the most poignant social issue addressed in the documentary? And what do you think your doc is trying to teach its audience about that issue? What is its purpose or goal? So this is a question of issue or issues, right? As well as message and intent. And these, you're going to see these things on the right-hand side of the screen here are really pointing towards what are going to be some of the key parts of our central claim statement. But for now, you should try and decide what is the most poignant. And notice how I say here the most poignant for you, meaning, let's say I'm thinking about the documentary, about um, let's say I'm thinking about the documentary O.J. Simpson Made in America, and the documentary seems to be focused on the alleged murders that O.J. Simpson allegedly committed. Um, and so it would seem that the main focus is kind of the justice system, crime, maybe even mental health and psychology. However, for me, even though it might not seem like a social issue that's the primary issue, the most poignant social issue there is, and even if the filmmakers, it wasn't their intention, that's fine. But for me, the most poignant social issue is perhaps race relations and racial equity, racial justice, and perceptions of race, particularly within Los Angeles. So I'm taking a social issue that might not be what seems to be the primary social issue, but it's the most poignant one for me, right? So we talked about early on how if you go take a look at documentaries, this is just a screenshot from the front page of the documentaries category on Netflix, right? There's all kinds of social issues that are being addressed, from crime and prison and the justice system to physical and mental health, historical events, nature and the environment, cultural icons, food industry. And that's just glancing at some of these. So there's plenty of social issues at stake in so many of these documentaries. If you're finding that you can't figure out what social issue your documentary is about, then maybe there isn't much of an argument to be had there. It's not something that's just a kind of you know it's not something that's just relatively easy to figure out in every single case. Some cases, the documentary might be a little unclear, or in some cases, it just might not be really developing or dealing with anything that you feel is very contentious, and you might not want to be able to, or you might not be able to develop a strong argument about that, or it doesn't have as much relevance as you'd like. But the point is that social issues isn't just like a cookie cutter type situation. Take a documentary like The Social Dilemma. I can look at this documentary from many different angles, depending on the social issues that I think are most poignant. So, this is why you'll hear me talk about social issues being lenses with which we can look at something. That is, we can look at something through the lens of a particular. So the Social Dilemma documentary, on the face of it, quite simply seems to be about social media. However, if I can get a little bit more specific and develop my, sort of develop my thinking, I can sort of find a number of different social issues, any one of these that I might take up. And I would be writing three different types of analyses according. I wouldn't want to write about all these social issues. It's too many. As much as it may not feel like it, we're still writing a pretty short essay, right? So you want to use that social issue as a way to focus in. So one thing I could talk about with the social dilemma is how social media impacts mental health and hinders personal development. Now, is the entire documentary about that? No, not necessarily, but that's, I'm not, your job isn't to write about every single thing that's brought up in the documentary. Our job is to try and develop an argument and an analysis through the lens of a social issue that helps me focus in on something. Let's say instead of that, I'm more interested in how the documentary teaches us something about how big tech companies are corrupted by greed and require regulation and ethical oversight. This doesn't mean that these mental health things aren't addressed. It's just not, that's not the social issue that I'm interested in. It's not the social issue I'm writing about in that particular essay. Or a third time, how social media indoctrinates us into consumerism and a commodification of self. So that's a totally different approach. And that's a totally different paper. This is, again, why you can see multiple analyses written about the same documentary or the same work of literature or the same movie or the same whatever, because you can always use a different social issue, come at it with a different kind of position, with a different kind of approach. So those social issues is key. And before we get into writing a central claim statement, we want to understand what social issue or issues do I want to focus in on? And then I can think about what do I think is the message and what is the intent of that. Following from that, I then want to think about what is the overall impact of the documentary and its message on the audience. What does it get them to realize, understand, or do? So I want to think about this notion of impact. Now, this is not unlike the effect of subclaims, right? Remember, we talked about each subclaim should have both a sense of should have an element, effect, and consequence, and they should be different in each subclaim. Here, impact is related to effect, but it's an overall impact rather than a singular effect, right? In effect, I'm talking about how a specific element is, sort of impacting the audience, and then how a different element in a different subclaim is impacting the audience in a different way. Here, I'm talking about what do I feel is the overall impact, because this is what's going to be part of my central claim statement. The next, I want to think about, do I think my documentary teaches us this lesson effectively? Why or why not? Now, you remember, it's that notion of critical engagement. Does your documentary get your audience to critically engage with the issue? Now, what critical engagement means is really up to you. Critical engagement for you might be how a documentary creates awareness and empathy, or maybe it's about how the documentary starts people to have, inspires discussion and conversation, or maybe how the documentary motivates people to become socially involved, and to become politically involved with the social issue, or maybe critical engagement is just um, getting people to getting people to recognize and appreciate a certain problem as it exists. So, and of course, this effectiveness, I can also go in the other direction, if you will. I can argue that the documentary is not effective at achieving its goals. And then I would write my analysis about how it fails to achieve those goals. So, effectiveness, which is also about our position, meaning what is our point of view, our perspective, our stance on this documentary? Is it effective or not? Finally, is a larger sense of significance. Whether or not you think the documentary fails or succeeds, what do you see as a larger consequence for the social issue, right? So maybe I want to argue that, Super Size Me as a documentary, actually, I feel like it actually isn't effective. It fails. And so, in that sense, it doesn't really get us to think twice about our eating habits, and it doesn't really challenge the food industry in any substantial way or get us to be motivated to challenge the food industry. Um, so, in that sense, the larger significance is about how it just really doesn't allow us, it sort of keeps everything intact. Conversely, let's say I'm writing about social dilemma, and let's say I feel like it does get us to become aware of the mental health issues associated with social media. So I would talk about the significance there would be that awareness, which is more kind of the impact. What's the significance of that? Well, once we have that awareness, we might actually start to better discipline ourselves and limit our use and moderate our use of social media so as to better take care of our own mental health, right? So that's the larger significance, right, in relation to mental health. So the impact would be a kind of awareness, and it may be an emotional understanding of social media's impact on mental health. And the significance is that it might allow us to better understand or enable us to take care of ourselves and discipline ourselves in relation to social media to strengthen our mental health. Okay, so those are kind of the four questions that we want to work towards answering, and that ultimately our central claim is going to be built from, right? So argument whether or not the documentary's message effectively allows for critical engagement with that issue. I'm going to answer that question of the prompt, if you will, with the central claim statement. So the central claim, let's just sort of put these questions up there in terms of how they might, um, sorry, moving the video again. I'm not sure if you can see that on your end or not, but so what do you see as the most prominent? So these are the kind of four questions, the four pieces: message, effectiveness slash position, impact, and significance. So message, effectiveness, impact, significance. Those are kind of the mantra you want to have. Those four pieces are the mantra you want to have when it comes to your central claim statement. So let's try and get into a little bit more of a sense of example. Um, you may have watched the trailer, which I'm probably going to link you to the trailers for Social Dilemma and for this Oscar Pistorius documentary by 30 for 30, which is an ESPN documentary series. And I actually came across this article doing a little research around the documentary. And this article basically puts forth a central claim statement. I mean, it's kind of spread out, and this is just one excerpt from it. And I think we can see all these matters of message, impact, or excuse me, message, effectiveness, impact, and significance are all present in this person's argument. And it's good to sort of do some research. It's something valuable to do in relation to your own documentary. Go take a look at what people are saying. A lot of times, things like Wikipedia and stuff, they're not very useful because they're not analytical or argumentative. Wikipedia is just a reference work. So I can do a little research into people who are actually writing down, creating critical analyses, writing their own opinions and perspectives and points of view on documentaries, on your documentary, ideally. And then you can sort of decide where you might agree with a little bit, you might disagree, you might have your own idea, your own reaction, your own point of view. So this was this person's take argument about the life and trials of Oscar Pistorius. They say, unfortunately, the life and trials of Oscar Pistorius falters in its attempt to weave in South Africa's history of apartheid and currently high frequency of gender-based violence. The director, Dan Gordon, manages to trace a racist and violent history without fully reckoning with the present-day realities of white supremacy in the country. In the process, the film seems to make the claim that Pistorius' own tragedies simply got caught up in an ugly national story that had little to do with him as an individual, a perspective that plays into white exceptionalism rather than challenging state violence and systemic oppression. So, if we sort of parcel this out in terms of those four questions we were talking about, right? Let's bring those back. What does this author, Cassie DaCosta, say? What do they feel is the message of the documentary about the social issue? That the documentary makes the claim that Pistorius' own tragedy simply got caught up in an ugly national story that had little to do with him as an individual. Obviously, this person feels that the documentary is not effective. They are, in some ways, writing a critique of the documentary as failing to do anything with any real productivity, right? So we get that sense of a position right from the start. The life and trials of Oscar Pistorius falters in its attempt to weave in South Africa's history of apartheid and currently high frequency of gender-based violence. So we have a clear sense of position. We have a sense of what they feel the actual message of the documentary is. What is the impact of that? It manages to trace a race and violent history, but it doesn't fully reckon with the present day realities of white supremacy in the country. So the impact is that it doesn't get us to think about us being the audience. It doesn't create a kind of awareness that this author was hoping for, that Cassie DaCosta was hoping for. It doesn't get us to fully reckon with the present day realities of white supremacy in South Africa. And then what's the larger significance of that? What's the bigger issue? Well, it rather than challenging state violence and systemic oppression, it just plays into white exceptionalism. It maintains a kind of notion of white privilege, and leaves race issues untouched, and leaves state violence and systemic oppression untouched. And so that's that bigger picture, right? So the smaller impact, if you will, is that it doesn't get us to fully reckon, doesn't get the audience to fully reckon. If it did, and since we're not getting to fully reckon with it, then it's not challenging the state violence from a larger social perspective. Okay, so let's take a look at this, though, in relation to going back to these kind of four questions. And I'm going to gear them more towards the central claim statement itself. What do I see as the message of my doc about the social issue? Do I feel that this message is effective? Why or why not? What kind of critical engagement or not does the doc bring about with the social issue? What is the impact of its message? And what larger value or problem does this lead to in regards to that social issue? What is its larger significance? So let me to give you an example of a central claim that was developed for an assignment very similar to the one that we're doing now. This person was writing about the documentary called Misrepresentation, which is an analysis. The documentary itself is kind of an investigation, an expose about the mass media and the kind of beauty industry, if you will, in terms of modeling and fashion industry and all that. And so They say the documentary film misrepresentation, that of course is the focus, does what? Do they feel it's doing something effective? Crucially reveals. So they, by saying crucially reveals, we get a sense of their position, as opposed to, unfortunately, Oscar Pistorius, Life and Trials of Oscar Pistorius falters. Here we have a sense that they feel like this documentary is doing something good. Okay, well, what is the message of it? Crucially reveals the exploitation and objectification, of women in mass media. Okay, what is the impact of that? Now, notice how they're doing this concisely, right? So once I answer those questions, one of my challenges is to try and fit it into a central claim statement that can fit at the end of my introduction. So what does that do? It allows us to realize how sexual stereotypes serve to dehumanize women from a very young age through adulthood, right? Okay, so it creates this sense of realization. That is the kind of immediate overall impact for the audience. And then why is this significant? Well, in turn, the film empowers us to support and fight for better self realization and social achievement for women. So here we have this larger consequence, if you will, this larger significance. So position, message, impact, significance. And that really is what we want to strive for. It's obviously quite easy to do. I don't mean to make it sound like it's easy to do. I was going to say it's easy to do when you're just putting it in a Google slideshow. But this is something we got to practice. Developing central claims, developing arguments is something that's very challenging and very difficult. Developing central claim statements, but it's usually a little bit easier if we can do all this work beforehand, right? So what do I mean by that work beforehand? Well, if we took a look at the way we've come at critical analysis, we didn't start with introduction and central claim. We know that when it comes to a critical analysis essay, we're going to have an introduction that has a central claim at its end. Then we're going to have, 3 to 4 subclaim driven analysis paragraphs, and then we're going to have a conclusion. However, in writing a critical analysis, we didn't start there. We started with pre-writing activities. We started with the double takes. We started brainstorming a possible documentary focus. Then we're starting to think about and have been thinking about what social issue or issues are most poignant that are at stake in that documentary. From there, then we started thinking about subclaims, right? Elements, effects, consequences, right? Just analyzing the documentary. Still, I don't really have a full sense of my argument. And that's because by doing that in analytical work, developing those subclaims like we did in Prying Eyes and like some of the work that we discussed in terms of the invention posts, I'm going to start to get a better sense of what my position is going to be. How do I feel about this documentary? I'm also going to get a better sense of what I think its message is about the social issue or issues. And I'm also going to get a better sense of what the impact is. Then once I have those pieces, those are some of the core pieces, of course, of a central claim statement. Then I can think about introduction and central claim. And we're kind of in this phase right now, right? We're now in a place where I think we have quite a bit of material in our pocket over the past 3 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever it's been, 3 weeks. And now we're probably ready to write the central claim and also even perhaps develop the introduction. So in thinking about introductions, they're obviously linked to central claims, right? The central claim comes at the end of the introduction. Central claim is the kind of announcement of your argument. So I want to take a look at a rough draft or a workshop draft introduction that was focusing in on, again, from a different semester, focusing on a documentary called Not So Pretty. So I'm just going to read through it, and then I'm going to talk about what this sort of teaches us about introductions and how they can become even stronger. It goes without saying in our age of social media that the beauty industry has extensive power, whether it's Kim Kardashian selling her own line of beauty products or a makeup influencer like Rocio Cervantes or Gabriel Zamora getting paid by such major beauty companies as Chanel, Nu Skin, or L'Oreal. Chances are you've been pulled into the allure of the beauty industry. The problem is that the primary goal of such companies is hardly safety, and there are numerous beauty product related accidents and illnesses arising every year. It's hard not to watch a television show or dive into social media without a beauty ad trying to sell you something. So it's no wonder that the beauty industry, makes billions of dollars a year. Luckily, a new documentary is out there to show us the truth of the beauty industry. Not So Pretty gives viewers a backstage pass to the corruption and greed behind the biggest beauty companies so that we can possibly stop being obsessed with beauty and stay safe. Okay, as far as a workshop draft introduction, this is quite good. And it actually does, I mean, there's still a lot to develop here, but usually when we think of introductions, we think that the role of the introduction is just to introduce the topic, right? Well, or the focus in our case, right? Introduce the documentary. This is doing a lot more than that, right? What we want to do with an introduction is we want to set up a sense of context around a certain social issue and identify what we see as the kind of problem of that the documentary is addressing in regards to that issue. So here you can see they do. They set up this social issue of the beauty industry and the lack of safety in the beauty industry, right? And so that bright blue, almost that turquoise color, that green gives us kind of the current situation with the beauty industry, right? Beauty industry is massive. It's all over social media, but it's obviously also many mega corporations that are involved in the beauty industry. And then we have, of course, this problem, this lack of safety. Um, and then also introducing the focus a little bit, not much here, right? I mean, the introduction is fairly short, but you want to say in the introduction, what makes this particular documentary unique? Give us at least a couple sentences. So you don't need to explain the entire documentary. That's not our job. We're not writing a book report about the documentary. Instead, you want to sort of give us a few sentences about what makes the documentary kind of unique. The idea that it gives viewers a backstage pass is kind of getting in there. I didn't put that in pink, but because I thought that's in the central claim statement. The central claim statement should sort of take all these pieces, the context, the issue, the focus, of course, the message, the impact, significance, and put that all together. So let me take a look at the revised version of this introduction. Again, this came from the ultimate final draft of this essay, and it's actually quite a bit longer. And it's using, as you can see, I have outside quote over there. It's using research. This is where research is going to come into play for these papers. It's using research to help establish a more detailed and defined context, right? One would assume an industry that globally generates $534 billion annually would have more consideration and concern toward the safety of its products. But the beauty industry doesn't like to be predictable. So notice how they immediately, by doing some research, just finding a statistic about how much money the beauty industry generates annually, right? Rather than saying like the beauty industry is so popular, look at Kim Kardashian, look at every time we turn on social media. Here they actually give us some evidence. And that gives you credibility as an author. It shows that you've done your research, you've done the legwork. We also get a sense of what's the problem right away. What that does is it creates relevance. We get a sense of the issue. We get a sense of we get a sense of the problem related to the issue, this issue of safety. Beauty is generally associated with women, but the men's beauty market is projected to generate $276.9 billion by 2030, making the health and safety or lack thereof within the beauty industry everyone's concern, not just one portion of the population. So notice what they're doing here is they're using the context and the problem, which the context is about the status and problem. They're using that to create relevance. This matters, and even if you might be you might be a man and feel like this doesn't apply to you, but it actually does. Whether or not you even use beauty products is so they're showing the relevance, establishing the relevance. This is why you should read this. Often, sometimes we think like, what's going to be a good hook for my essay? The strongest hook is getting your audience to care. And so if we're seeing this huge industry, $534 billion, $276.9 billion, and this lack of concern and for safety, that gets our attention, right? It creates relevance. A recent study by Harvard University claims that the average woman uses 12 beauty products a day: lotions, hair dye, makeup, and fragrances, to name a few. Even though 67% of consumers use cosmetics, cosmetic companies lack proper oversight. Government agencies like the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, which is supposed to protect consumers, have little to no authority when it comes to enforcing safety standards for the cosmetics industry. From a company standpoint, the main goal is revenue, not safety. And without requirements that get companies to care about safety, there is none. the introduction goes on, of course. We haven't even got to the focus yet, right? We're just establishing the context and the relevant. Despite critiques regarding misunderstanding the fundamental concepts of chemistry and formulation, Not So Pretty, a four-part documentary series directed by Kirby Dick and Amy Ziering, exposes the dangers that are concealed within the beauty industry that is primarily marketed towards women and children who are blindly unaware of the hazards. What makes Not So Pretty so impactful, however, is the way that it balances an emotional connection with the audience through authentic testimonials with credible evidence of corporate misconduct and carelessness. So now where we're getting a little bit, now we're honing in on the focus. We get the larger context, the problem, the issue, of course, and then we hone in and connect to Not So Pretty, and we explain why Not So Pretty is distinct, what makes it notable, and how it connects to the issue. And then we lead into that central claim, which kind of puts all these pieces together. Remember, we're thinking about position, message, impact, significance. So Not So Pretty powerfully uncovers. So we have a clear sense that this author feels like, in their point of view, this documentary is doing something valuable. What is its message? The disturbing hidden truths of the top companies in the beauty industry. What is the impact of that? That educates its audience to be aware of the dangers of beauty products. Okay. Why is that significant? That is significant because each one of us in turn feels empowered to not only shop more responsibly, but demand more ethical business practices from the companies we normally adore. So there we have that sense of message, we have that sense of position, effectiveness, we have that sense of impact, we have that sense of significance, but it's much more relevant, right? The role of the introduction is to create that sense of relevance in relation to, and of course, introduce the focus of the documentary, but, and talk about how the documentary, what makes it distinct. But it's really about the primary role of the introduction is to set up the context and set up the relevance for your audience and get your audience to care. So finally, with that in hand, um, and we have worksheets, and this is just to put the whole introduction on the screen. We have worksheets on introductions. We have worksheets on central claims. We, of course, have worksheets on subclaims and analysis organization. That's all in the course documents module. So you can see further examples there as well. They're also linked in both our WD2 and our FD2 assignments. So just so you know that. Lastly, with research, I am asking you to use in the WD2, you're going to want to use at least one outside source. And in the FD2, you're going to want to use at least two. Now, what research are you looking for? I find that a lot of young writers in high school or what have you were told that you need to go find evidence, quotes that will match your argument. That's not what we're doing. Our evidence and examples, right? That's like writing a report or something. Our evidence and examples are from the documentary itself, right? The elements, the subclaims, the evidence and examples should be based upon our subclaims. Now, sure, we can bring in quotes that help support a point we're making, but there's also other things we can do with research, right? So I can look for details of context, right? So you saw in that introduction we just looked at, they're giving details of context about the social issue regarding the beauty industry. That's something very different. The beauty industry. It's also giving some background or expository information about the documentary itself. Or you can use research to find details about a social issue. So those first three options are really related to the introduction in terms of your research. So details of context prior to the film's release, reports of animal abuse at the corporate level had been largely ignored, with only 25% of the Americans viewing animal rights as an important social issue. Okay, this is, I think, related to the documentary Blackfish. Now, it wasn't that the article, the article might have been because it's talking about prior to the film's release, but the article doesn't need to be about Blackfish, right? It doesn't need to be about my documentary. It could just be about animal abuse in our society. So I could find background or expository information, though, about the documentary. It should be no surprise that Tiger King is the most streamed show on Netflix, considering the docuseries spent a record 27 straight days in the #1 spot, right? So I can also use my research to find a little bit more information about my documentary. Also, details of social issue, right? The debates that are out there, the concepts. While most don't see the food industry as a problem in our society, sociologist Joe Heath argues that this is because too few of us are aware of its problems. So I can use my research to help establish the kind of relevance, the context, the details in relation to my social issue. Then I can also think about using research for further evidence. To the point, the Department of Justice have themselves cited a lack of racial empathy as a profound reason behind biased policing. So let's say this person was writing an analysis of the documentary 13th, and one of the points that 13th the documentary makes is it talks about bias in the social just in the excuse me in the justice system and in law enforcement, racial bias, and so they use this quote to sort of back up the point that was being made in the documentary 13. A few more things that we can use research for. Quotes for outside support or backup, right? As director Ava DuVernay has stated herself, I don't believe we can move forward until we see and know what is happening. So this is a quote that directly from the director of 13th, Ava DuVernay, that this person was using in their essay as a form of further backup. Quotes to build from. While critic, Alison Venter has said the documentary raises important questions about social media, we can see this film doing even more than that in the way that it inspires us to challenge our own social media habits. So this person was actually quoting and then responding to a quote, saying like they found this quote that Alison Venter said that it raises important questions about social media. Then they said, but we can see how this film does much more than that, right? Using a quote as a jumping off point into one's own position and argument. Like I said earlier, you might want to do a little research about your documentary. What are people saying about, or what have people said about it, or what are people saying about it? Do you agree with them, disagree with them? Even if you disagree with them, you can counter them. Still use the quote and show and use it as a way to go in a new direction. That's what like the quotes for counter here's. Though Phillips argues that Super Size Me is often too gruesome and exaggerated, this exaggeration and harsh imagery of the documentary is actually what leaves its memorable mark on the audience. So this person tries to takes this other argument and says, okay, I disagree with this person. I'm going to show you how this stuff is actually important. So I can use that research, just doing some non-academic research. We'll worry about academic research later, just to help me. I can help me in multiple ways, whether it's the context of my introduction, whether it's detailing the issue, whether it's using it as to help me describe what's distinct about my film or how my documentary connects to the social issue, or it can even allow me to sort of highlight the distinctness of my argumentative approach, or how my argumentative approach is different from other argumentative approaches. So research can play many roles. So we'll want to get one of those quotes for our WD2, and then we'll want to have two for our FD2. So keep an eye out for that. Beyond that, I think that's the end, and that's it for me. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to the conversation in this video workshop. Take care.